When a man is addicted to you, he'll do these 7 things. He can't help himself. Something shifts when a man genuinely falls for you after 60. It's different from the infatuation of youth, different from the performative romance of early dating, different from anything you might remember from decades ago. And if you're not paying attention, you might miss it entirely, because mature love doesn't always announce itself with grand gestures or dramatic declarations. Sometimes it shows up in the smallest, most ordinary moments that reveal everything. Margaret was 68 when she started seeing Robert, and she'd almost convinced herself she was reading too much into things. They'd been dating for 4 months. Nothing official, nothing defined. He was kind, consistent, and thoughtful, but she kept waiting for the other shoe to drop. She'd been divorced for 12 years, had dated sporadically, and had learned to protect herself from investing too deeply too quickly. So when her daughter asked if Robert was serious about her, Margaret genuinely didn't know how to answer. Then one Saturday afternoon, Robert showed up at her house unannounced. Not with flowers or wine or any traditional romantic offering. He showed up with a small toolkit and a replacement part for her kitchen cabinet hinge that had been sticking for months. "I noticed it last week when I was here," he said casually. "Figured I'd grab the part and fix it while I was thinking about it." Margaret stood in her kitchen doorway watching this man she was still getting to know, crouched on her floor, fixing something she'd mentioned exactly once in passing, and something clicked into place. This wasn't a man who was casually dating her. This was a man who was weaving himself into the fabric of her daily life, who was paying attention to details she barely remembered sharing, who was showing up without being asked because her comfort mattered to him. That's what we're talking about today. Not the obvious signs, not the easy-to-spot declarations, but the subtle, undeniable ways a man reveals that you already have him, body and soul, even if he hasn't said those exact words yet. Before we dive in, subscribe to this channel right now, because what I'm about to share will change how you interpret male behavior forever. We're going to decode the specific actions that relationship researchers say indicate genuine attachment, the signs that 83% of men cannot fake or hide when they're truly invested, and why understanding these patterns will save you from wasting time on men who aren't all in. So subscribe, turn on notifications, and let's talk about what it really looks like when you already have him. The first sign is that he remembers the things that don't matter to anyone but you. Not your birthday, not your anniversary, not the obvious dates that calendars remind him about. I'm talking about the granular details of your life that have no significance to the outside world, but carry weight in your personal universe. He remembers that you prefer your coffee reheated once, but not twice, because the second heating makes it bitter. He remembers that Thursdays are hard for you because that's when you visit your mother at the memory care facility. He remembers that you mentioned loving a specific author in a conversation 3 weeks ago, and suddenly that author's new book appears on your doorstep. Dr. John Gottman, who spent 40 years researching what makes relationships succeed or fail, calls this building love maps. It's the detailed knowledge of your partner's inner world, and it's one of the strongest predictors of relationship longevity. But here's what makes it particularly meaningful after 60. At this stage of life, most people's patterns are deeply established. The man who's casually dating you might remember the big things, but the man who's genuinely invested is actively studying the map of who you are. Linda was 65 when she noticed this pattern with Thomas. They've been seeing each other for 5 months when Linda mentioned, almost in passing, that she always felt slightly melancholy on October 15th, because that was the anniversary of her father's death. She didn't make a big deal of it, didn't expect Thomas to mark the date or do anything special. But when October 15th came around, Thomas called her that morning, not with condolences or heavy emotion, but with a simple, "I'm thinking of you today. Want some company this evening, or would you rather have space?" That single gesture told Linda everything she needed to know.
Thomas wasn't just dating her. He was paying attention to her emotional landscape with the kind of care that can't be faked. He'd filed away that small detail from a conversation weeks earlier, marked it as significant because it was significant to her, and showed up in exactly the way she needed without her having to ask. Research from the University of California shows that men who are genuinely attached demonstrate what psychologists call cognitive empathy, the ability to understand another person's perspective and hold that information as important. When a man remembers the details that matter only to you, he's demonstrating that your inner world has become part of his regular mental landscape. You're not a casual visitor in his thoughts. You're a permanent resident. Carol experienced this when she casually mentioned that she'd been craving her grandmother's pierogi recipe but hadn't made them in years because the process felt overwhelming to do alone. 2 weeks later, her boyfriend Kenneth showed up on a Saturday morning with ingredients and a simple proposal: let's figure it out together. He'd remembered not just the craving, but the emotional barrier preventing her from satisfying it, and he'd offered a solution that addressed both. When a man remembers the small things, he's telling you that you matter in ways that go beyond surface-level attraction. He's building a detailed understanding of who you are because he's planning on being around long enough for those details to matter. The second sign is that he protects your peace without being asked. This one is subtle but profound. The man who has you doesn't wait for you to request consideration. He automatically factors your well-being into his decisions. He doesn't play loud music early in the morning when he stays over because he remembers you're not a morning person. He doesn't spring last-minute plan changes on you because he knows you prefer some structure to your days. He doesn't engage in behavior that creates unnecessary stress or chaos in your life because your peace has become precious to him. Dorothy was 66 when she realized Michael was doing this consistently. She had a stressful job that often left her drained by Friday evenings. Michael started structuring their Friday plans around that reality without Dorothy ever explicitly asking him to. He'd suggest low-key dinners at quiet restaurants instead of crowded venues. He'd offer to pick up takeout and bring it to her place rather than expecting her to get dressed and go out. He'd check in Friday afternoons with a simple high-energy or low-energy evening and adjust accordingly. Dr. Sue Johnson, developer of emotionally focused therapy, explains that this behavior demonstrates what she calls accessibility and responsiveness, two of the 3 pillars of secure attachment. When a man is truly invested, your emotional state becomes something he monitors and responds to naturally. He's not doing it because you've trained him or because he's afraid of your reaction. He's doing it because making your life easier has become one of his priorities. This is dramatically different from the man who's casually involved with you. That man plans dates that are convenient for him and expects you to adapt. That man changes plans last minute without considering how it affects your schedule. That man creates small dramas and interpersonal conflicts that you have to manage because he's not thinking about the cumulative toll his behavior takes on your nervous system. Helen noticed this distinction clearly when comparing her current relationship with Richard to her previous marriage. Her ex-husband had been a good man in many ways, but he'd never factored her peace into his decisions. He'd invite people over without checking with her first. He'd commit them to social obligations without asking if she had the energy. He'd start serious conversations right before bed when she was exhausted. It wasn't malicious, but it also wasn't considerate. Richard was different. He'd say things like, "I know you've got that presentation Monday, so I'm going to head out Sunday afternoon and give you space to prepare." Or, "My buddy invited us to a party Saturday, but I know you've had a draining week, so I told him maybe next time." He was actively choosing her peace over his social opportunities, and he wasn't keeping score or expecting gratitude. He was just factoring her well-being into his decision-making the way you naturally do when someone matters deeply to you. Research published in the Journal of Personality and Social Psychology found that partners who demonstrate this kind of anticipatory care, where they prevent stress rather than just responding to it after it occurs, report significantly higher relationship satisfaction and longevity. When a man protects your peace without being asked, he's showing you that he's thinking long-term, that he understands sustainable partnership requires protecting each other's well-being proactively.
The third sign is that he includes you in his future without making it a big production. You'll notice I said includes, not plans, because the man who's genuinely invested doesn't sit you down for a serious conversation about where this is going. He just starts referencing future events with you in them, as if it's completely assumed that you'll be there. Next summer when we go to visit my daughter, or we should probably start thinking about holiday travel, or when your lease is up, we should talk about whether it makes sense to renew or look for a place together. These casual inclusions are more telling than elaborate future planning because they reveal that in his mind, you're already a fixed part of his landscape. He's not wondering if you'll still be together in 6 months. He's already assumed you will be and is making decisions accordingly. Patricia was 64 when she caught this pattern with David. They'd been dating for 7 months when David casually mentioned that he'd put her down as his +1 for his son's wedding the following spring. Not as a question, not as a nervous proposition, just as a fact. "I gave them your name for the seating chart," he said while they were making dinner together. "The wedding's in May, by the way. Probably want to book our hotel soon." That simple statement told Patricia more than any declaration of love could have. David wasn't wondering if they'd still be together in May. He wasn't hedging his bets or leaving his options open. He'd claimed her as his partner in a family event 8 months away, as casually as discussing what to have for dinner. And that casualness was exactly what made it meaningful. Relationship researcher Dr. Gary Landowski explains that this behavior indicates what psychologists call cognitive interdependence, where your sense of self begins to merge with your partner's. When a man is truly invested, he stops thinking in terms of I and automatically shifts to we. Not because he's trying to lock you down or move things too fast, but because that's genuinely how he's processing his future now. Barbara experienced this when her boyfriend Martin started making small purchases for his house based on her preferences. He bought a specific type of coffee maker because it was the kind she liked. He replaced his uncomfortable couch because she'd mentioned her back hurt after sitting on it. He planted flowers in his garden that she'd said she found beautiful. He wasn't asking her to move in or making grand gestures about shared space. He was just naturally adapting his environment to accommodate someone he expected to be spending significant time there. This is fundamentally different from the man who keeps you compartmentalized. That man doesn't mention you to his family until the relationship is official. That man makes major decisions without considering how they affect you. That man talks about his future in singular terms because he's still thinking of himself as a solo operator who happens to have company sometimes. When a man includes you in his future casually and consistently, he's showing you that the question of whether you'll be together isn't a question anymore. In his mind, it's already answered.
The fourth sign, the one that 83% of men cannot hide, is that his body unconsciously orients towards you. This is the physical tell that reveals everything, and it happens without conscious thought. When you're in a room together, his body angles toward you even when he's talking to someone else. When you speak, he stops what he's doing and gives you his full attention. When you're walking together, he unconsciously adjusts his pace to match yours. When you're sitting near each other, he finds small ways to maintain physical contact, a hand on your knee, his leg pressed against yours, his arm along the back of your chair. Dr. Paul Ekman, the psychologist who pioneered the study of nonverbal behavior, explains that our bodies betray our true feelings in ways we cannot consciously control. A man can lie with his words, carefully manage his responses, and present a curated version of his feelings. But his body will tell the truth, and when a man has you, his body treats you like a gravitational center. Research conducted at MIT found that couples who are genuinely bonded demonstrate what scientists call physical synchrony, where their movements, breathing patterns, and even heart rates begin to align when they're near each other. But even before that level of synchrony develops, there are clear behavioral indicators that reveal attachment. Ruth was 70 when she noticed this with James. They'd be at social gatherings, and even when James was engaged in conversation with other people, his body would stay oriented toward where she was standing. If she moved to a different part of the room, within minutes, he'd unconsciously drift closer. When they sat together, he'd reach for her hand without seeming to think about it. When she spoke, everything else stopped. His phone could be buzzing, someone else could be mid-sentence, but when Ruth started talking, James's attention locked onto her completely. Her friend pointed it out at a dinner party. Have you noticed that James tracks your movements like he's afraid you'll disappear? It's actually beautiful to watch. He's completely oriented around you. Ruth hadn't noticed consciously, but once it was pointed out, she couldn't unsee it. And she realized she felt it. There was a security in knowing that even when they were in separate conversations at opposite ends of the room, some part of James was always aware of where she was, always tracking back to make sure she was okay. Susan experienced this awareness with Richard in a different way. She had minor surgery that required someone to drive her home and stay with her for 24 hours. Richard took 2 days off work without being asked, showed up at the hospital, and spent the entire recovery period making sure she was comfortable. But what struck Susan most wasn't the grand gesture of taking time off. It was the small physical attentions. How he'd check her forehead for fever with the back of his hand while she was dozing. How he'd adjust her pillows without waking her. How he'd sit in a chair next to her bed reading because he wanted to be immediately available if she needed anything. My ex-husband would have done the functional things, Susan told her sister later. He would have picked me up, gotten my prescriptions, made sure I ate, but he wouldn't have stayed. He wouldn't have maintained that physical presence like Richard did. It's like Richard's body couldn't fully relax unless he was close enough to monitor that I was okay. The 83% statistic comes from a University of Pennsylvania study on nonverbal indicators of attachment. Researchers found that while men could successfully hide their feelings verbally when asked directly about their level of commitment, 83% of them demonstrated clear nonverbal attachment behaviors that observers could accurately identify. The body tells the truth even when the mouth is trying to protect or conceal. When a man has you, his body knows it before his conscious mind might be ready to articulate it. You become his point of reference in physical space. You become the person his attention returns to naturally. You become the one his body wants to stay connected to through small touches and proximity.
The fifth sign is that he advocates for you even when you're not there. The man who has you doesn't just treat you well to your face. He defends your reputation, corrects misassumptions about you, and speaks of you with genuine pride when you're not around to hear it. Your well-being has become intertwined with his sense of integrity. Carol was 67 when a mutual friend mentioned casually, "Kenneth was telling everyone at the club about your volunteer work with literacy programs. He was so proud, describing the impact you've had." Carol felt something shift in her chest. Kenneth had never mentioned this conversation to her. He wasn't doing it for credit. He was doing it because she'd become central enough to his life that talking about her was natural. Linda experienced this even more powerfully when she overheard Thomas defending their relationship to his skeptical son. "She's the most genuine person I've met in decades," Thomas said firmly. "I'm not going to play it safe and miss out on building something real just because I'm scared. I'd rather risk heartbreak than spend my remaining years alone because I was too cautious to take a chance on someone extraordinary." Thomas wasn't performing for Linda's benefit. He didn't know she could hear him.
He was advocating for her because that's what you do when someone has become part of your identity. When a man speaks about you with conviction and pride in your absence, his commitment isn't performative, it's real. The sixth sign is that he's willing to be uncomfortable for your growth. Mature love doesn't try to keep you small or convenient. The man who genuinely has you wants to see you thrive, even when your growth stretches him beyond his comfort zone. Your fulfillment matters more to him than his convenience. Dorothy was 68 when she got an opportunity for a 3-month research project in another state. She was prepared for Michael to be disappointed, maybe even to pull back. Instead, his response floored her. "This is incredible. When do you leave? We'll figure out the distance thing. This is too important for you to pass up because of logistics." Over 3 months, Michael flew out twice to visit, sent care packages, and never once made Dorothy feel guilty about being busy or distracted. Helen experienced this when she wanted to take painting classes that met on the same evening she and Richard usually spent together. She was prepared to give up the classes. But Richard insisted she take them. "This is something that lights you up. I'm not going to be the reason you don't do it." Months later, when Helen's paintings were featured in a small gallery show, Richard invited everyone he knew. He was more proud of her accomplishment than she'd been herself. When a man is willing to be uncomfortable for your growth, he's showing you that he loves who you're becoming more than he loves the comfort of keeping things exactly as they are. The seventh sign is that he repairs quickly after conflict. Every relationship includes disagreement. What separates the man who has you from the man who's ambivalent is how he responds to rupture. The man who's genuinely invested cannot tolerate extended disconnection. He comes back quickly with a genuine attempt to repair, to understand, to reconnect. Patricia was 65 when she had her first real argument with David. She went home upset, expecting they'd need a few days of space. David called 3 hours later. "I can't go to sleep with this unresolved. I'm sorry for my part in that conversation going sideways. I want to understand your perspective better. Can we talk?" That willingness to move toward conflict rather than away from it told Patricia everything about David's investment. He couldn't tolerate the distance that conflict created, so he was willing to be vulnerable, to apologize, to listen. Barbara saw this pattern when she compared Martin to her ex-husband. Her ex could go days without speaking after a disagreement, perfectly comfortable with the Cold War. Martin would follow up within hours with some attempt to bridge, a text acknowledging his part, a question about how she was feeling, an invitation to talk when she was ready. When a man repairs quickly after conflict, he's showing you that the relationship is more valuable to him than his pride, his comfort, or his need to be right. Disconnection from you is painful enough to motivate him toward reconnection.
Here's what all of these signs reveal. When a man genuinely has you, you'll feel it in the consistency of his actions long before you hear it in his words. You'll see it in how he remembers what matters to you, protects your peace, includes you in his future, orients his body toward you, advocates for you in your absence, supports your growth, and repairs quickly after conflict. These aren't behaviors that can be faked long-term. These aren't performances that men consciously construct. These are the natural byproducts of genuine attachment, the ways love reveals itself through action when someone has become essential to your sense of home. Margaret, Linda, Carol, Dorothy, Helen, Ruth, Patricia, Barbara. All of these women learned to trust these signs more than words, more than dramatic gestures, more than explicit declarations. They learned that real love after 60 shows up in ordinary moments, in consistent small actions, in the way a man's behavior reveals that you've become woven into the fabric of his daily life. If you're experiencing these signs, you don't need to wonder where you stand. You already know. He might not have said, "I love you," yet. He might not have proposed or made some grand romantic declaration. But his actions are telling you every single day that you already have him, and that's worth more than 1,000 words. So pay attention to the details, notice the patterns, trust what his behavior is showing you. Because when you already have him, you'll know it not by what he says, but by what he does when he thinks no one is watching. If this resonated with you, leave a comment below. Tell me which sign you've noticed or which one surprised you most. And share this video with women who need to understand what genuine male investment actually looks like after 60. You deserve a man whose actions match his words. You deserve someone whose body, mind, and daily choices all point in the same direction, toward you. Never settle for less. I'll see you in the next video.